Okay, everyone. Well, it is 1:30, so we're going to keep moving along. We're now turning to 5 presenters from industry. We have Jodie Schmidt, Patrick Kidd, Gavin Lind, Sharon Robertson, and Paul Walsh. So we look forward to hearing the perspective on what they're driving and where they're coming from their specific industry sectors. And we're going to kick off with Jodie. So thank you very much, Jodie. Over to you.
Thanks, Jenny. And I'd like to acknowledge the original custodians on the land of our nation and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. And also thank TDA for the opportunity. I think it is the first opportunity for skills organisations to talk to TDA members. The brief, as I understand it, is to talk about our high level priorities and then to engage in a conversation about how we can engage TAFE institutes and the wider TAFE community in the work that we're doing. And since I'm the first of the SSOs, I thought it'd be worth just recapping. As many of you will know, the Human Services Skills Organisation, along with the Digital Skills Organisation and Mining Skills Organisation, are pilots established by the Australian Government to deliver stronger industry engagement and contribution to the national training system. And we're charged with testing new ways to ensure that the VET system is more responsive to the skills needs of industry, and to explore potential design approaches and opportunities to deepening industry engagement with the intent of enabling employers to take ownership and lead thinking on workforce issues from attraction, recruitment, skills development and retention of the workforce, and to understand what is needed to drive those industries in our economy. And therefore, the Human Services Skills Organisation, we view ourselves as a national employer-led body with a board comprised of CEOs from across the sectors we represent. And for context, human services at this point in time is defined by aged care, disability care, veterans care, allied health, community health, youth services, and early childhood education and care. So not much to do over daytime. As we heard clearly from George this morning, Australia needs to rapidly grow a diverse, skilled and adaptable workforce for these sectors. It's a social policy issue and a social change that's coming to our country if it's not been here already. And Jenny noted that we've been aware of it in the VET sector for a long time, but it's going to get bigger. We need to protect, promote and respect the safety, wellbeing, participation and choice, not only of older Australians, people with disabilities, veterans and children, but the broader community. And the expected growth rate in health and social assistance, which will make the largest contribution to employment growth over the period of 2020 to 2025, is going to be more than 14% and double any other industry. So the approach that the HSSO has taken to our mandate is to position ourselves as a strategic, innovative representative of stakeholders' varied and diverse needs, and our stakeholders are employers, but not limited to employers. We're going to be the go-to for human services employers on training and workforce development, and facilitate conversations, engagement, delivery, reform and policy between the VET sector, other key stakeholders and government on a range of issues. We think it needs to be collaborative, bringing together cross-sector stakeholders, employers, current and future workers, training organisations, industry experts, peaks and workforce bodies, and government to ensure workforce development and training programs are relevant and responsive to the growing and evolving workforce of these sectors. So our strategy, somewhat simple, but threefold, is to achieve a depth of true engagement with employers. I think from my experience in the VET sector, employers aren't always engaged in the way that we would like from a VET sector perspective. And I think the views from the employer side often match but are different in that way. We need to understand their pain points, the critical workforce issues, and to facilitate innovation and partnership with the VET system. To drive quality skills development across the workforce lifecycle, and I think the notable difference between the existing industry engagement mechanism employed by government and this one is that our mandate expands from qualification development to the front end of attraction through skills development and retention and further development for industry. And we're taking that role really seriously. And we need to support our sectors to grow and prosper through technology adoption, research and forecasting requirements, and ensuring that we're working together to meet future demand and development of our sectors. We have a range of projects in flight and many more in development, having only been operational for about 8 months. Our sectors are predominantly government funded, and as such, we're supporting the implementation of a number of national strategies, including a matter of care, the Aged Care Workforce Strategy. We are supporting the Aged Care Workforce Industry Council and the Department of Health on a range of initiatives, including mapping job architecture, developing consistent job profiles and career pathways that don't exist in the aged care sector, establishing sustainable approaches to recognising the skills of the existing workforce ahead of consideration by the government of whether qualifications will be made mandatory, and a range of other recommendations from the Royal Commission into Aged Care. Similarly, in terms of the NDIS National Workforce Plan, we're supporting the Department of Social Services through projects such as boosting the local care workforce, mapping job architecture again, job profiles and career pathways, implementation of the NDIS capability framework that's just released yesterday or today, and identifying perceived skill gaps, both in compliance from the regulator perspective and employers that will see a collaborative approach to building with training organisations, national micro-credentials and a framework for those in the disability sector. And therefore, the topics that we've been talking about this morning in terms of micro-credentials are really topical. Our projects then build on that work and respond to specific issues raised by employers in the formation process for skills orgs. One of the issues for the human services sector is that across our jurisdictional departments of offering community services, health, and education at all 3 levels of government to some extent, there is hundreds of workforce development funded projects taking place, often duplicating effort, overlapping, and there's an opportunity to pull them together for the sector and for our collective sectors to understand how we might make them more targeted and produce better outcomes. And we've commissioned work to map the human services sector workforce development and training programs. We've found more than 570 programs in flight right now, and to create a visualization for them for the sector so that we can together make more sense of it and get better outcomes. We're producing a how to engage guide for employers in terms of how they can best engage with the vet sector, understand shared expectations of training, support, assessment, and a number of other issues. We're developing on behalf of the Australian Industry Skills Council guidelines for undertaking mandatory work requirements in the community services sectors, but more importantly, putting together a guide to support employers, RTOs and learners in terms of simplifying the requirements, the understanding and highlighting best practice. We, of course, are undertaking a qualification design trial. That qualification design trial, in essence, brings to life the model that was put out in a survey from the government last week around the concept of developing occupational standards, training and assessment standards, and testing and trialling that with a range of existing qualifications in terms of how that might work. And we've just recently evaluated an entry to care role skill set that was put together during COVID to enable individuals to enter the workforce with the required minimum skill set to be what we might call work ready, but not yet job ready. So that gives you a range of examples of the work that we're doing so far and will continue to do. In terms of engaging with TAFE institutes, we've had discussions across each jurisdiction thus far around the work that we're doing and what the insights that you can provide to the discussion that we're having. We're certainly engaging with the TAFE Aged Care Task Force, TACT, and a range of other projects that are being undertaken across TAFE institutes on how we can promote outcomes of those projects, connect with employers and other opportunities. And we have a number of representatives from TAFE institutes already participating in advisory groups and project consultations that are underway. And so we'd encourage connection, co-creation and collaboration as we move through our mandate and continue to explore what our part of the vet reform frame looks like. So I'll leave it there and I look forward to questions when we come back, Jenny.
Thank you very much, Jodie. I'm going to actually ask all 5 of the industry speakers if they wouldn't mind going on to video, and Jodie, you remaining on video while the others present, because I think that'll help focus where our presentations are coming from. So I'm going to turn now to Patrick Kidd. Patrick is the CEO of the Digital Skills Organisation. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you very much, and I'll just try and do the obvious in terms of just sharing the screen. So just let me know if that is coming through. Are you getting
all good? Thank you. Yep.
Thank you very much indeed. And firstly, good afternoon. I'm sorry I wasn't here this morning. I had some other things that I had to attend to, but I also sort of always conscious of the fact that I might be overstaying my welcome. So but I'm really pleased to be here this afternoon. And firstly, can I just thank all of you actually in terms of all of the TAFEs that we've spoken to who've been incredibly sort of welcoming and supportive of the work that we're doing. I'm particularly appreciative of the work that we've done with TAFE directors. You know, Craig and Ron have been absolutely fabulous to us since we started, and I come from a very different background, so I've really appreciated the transparency and the support and the insight. So, and I really look forward to sort of building on that relationship as we go forwards. So I was told absolutely clearly 1 slide, 7 minutes. So I've squeezed as much onto this slide as I possibly could, just to sort of help you through your Friday afternoon. And what I'll try and do is give you a sort of a sense as to what we're doing, where we're focused, and really happy to take any questions. So DSO, perfectly sort of presented by Jodie at the very start, so I won't need to sort of talk about the background. Really, when we think about the digital space, it's like 1,000,000 miles wide and 1,000,000 miles deep. And one of the biggest challenges we've had is trying to get our hands around the things that we can realistically do that are going to help us to get forward. It's a little bit like a bottomless pit of blancmange, and you're sort of like, you're in there, you're trying to find the thing and chuck it against the wall and you can't do it. But it's taken us a while to get there, but I think we're now there. So really we're focused on sort of like 4 problems and 4 questions that we want to answer. And then from that we get 4 goals really in terms of sort of what it is our program's about. So if I was at a very high level, you know, the problems that we're focused on, and we had a sort of a session on this a couple of weeks ago, which some of you may have been at, which was around what are the problems that we need to address within the digital space. So one is around obviously the need to increase the number of digital professionals, but it's more than that. Actually, it's about uplifting the general digital skills of the population. It might be around literacy, but it's also around the general digital skills of people in the workplace. So it's much more than just digital professionals. We know that within the sector that it's slow to change, and certainly within the statistics that are coming out from the ICT space, the completion rate is low. So we need to help the vet sector specifically to sort of uplift the role that it plays, because there's enough opportunity there for them to have a really important role to play. We know that the numbers of ICT employers themselves are not probably less than half of them are not satisfied with the training that's coming out of the system. And so therefore there's something more we can do there to ensure that the individuals are coming out with the right skills, right time that employers are going to appreciate. And we know that there's a variable quality of training across different providers. So there's also an opportunity there, obviously, to sort of help uplift capability. So if those are the problems, that then takes us to sort of really 4 core questions. We very much think about this from a sort of a case for change perspective. I know that has a certain language in the vet world, but you know, when we're thinking about it, we're thinking about what do we want the new system to look like that really recognizes the needs of the digital space. So firstly, what are the digital skills pathways that are going to really get at the demand that's there? Secondly, for us, we talk very much around digital being a skills-based approach. There are digital jobs, but actually in many respects, digital skills have to be applied across a range of jobs across all industries. So it's every industry, every business. And so really it's what's the skill set that's going to make a difference to small, medium and larger size businesses? What does that look like? And how do we sort of put that in play across different industry groupings? How do we put in place inclusive and accessible lifelong learning opportunities? And we absolutely see that digital knowledge and skills is a fundamental enabler of people in the economy. It enables people to interact with work in a way that they never could before. So it's an inclusive approach. It's people of different abilities, be they from a gender side or a physical disability side. People who can get the right digital skills can now engage in the workplace in a way that they never could before. And that's like a fabulous opportunity as we go forwards. And then at the end of it all, we need to look at those governance arrangements at sort of state and federal level to make sure we've got something in place that's going to be useful and relevant as we go forwards. So that then takes us to sort of like 4 goals and 1 request. So really our goals are summarized up there. First and foremost, we talk about setting the foundations. And so for us, that's very much around this skills-based approach. And there's a model that goes with that, whereby we try to capture best practice, describe best practice, so in a coherent way from an end-to-end perspective that is all about getting people into work. And so that model describes that, and that's a discussion paper that will come out towards the end of this year that we'll use as the basis to really try and take forwards the approach into the sector to really understand what works, what doesn't work, and really what does the future look like. As a part of those foundations, everything is based upon research. And so there I just have a snapshot of the many, many reports that are out there, great reports, great insights. And we spend a lot of time looking at those and trying to learn from what those reports say and what they're telling us, because we don't necessarily have to go out there and relearn everything. Another thing that we've done is with a piece of work with NCVR, which is going to be sort of finalized over the next month or so, but in there they have looked across best practice overseas, and they'll propose an approach to what does a digital career pathway look like. And that talks about literacy, it talks about fluency, it talks about professionals. It tries to bucket the skills up in a coherent way. But one of the challenges in the space is actually having a common language, a common taxonomy that helps link together schools with higher education, with VET. And so that's, we've really got to sort of find a way of bringing ourselves together around that language, and that pathways work is a really important component of that. And then the other part that's really important from the foundation side, Jodie talked about it, was the qualifications trial, which for us helps us to really define what that skills framework looks like, how to pull that together, and then obviously then how you might scale it. So the foundations for us is super important. It gets captured and brought back into the model. The model is very much that articulation of how it is we wish to progress. We run a series of programs which are focused around digital upskilling. So in there, for example, we had the Train 100 data analyst. That was an example using 3 different providers. Queensland TAFE was one of those, which was looking at a skills-based approach and just doing it on a narrow front with data analysts. So that report will come out in the next month or so. We're now working with Kangan and Bendigo TAFE and some local employers down in Melbourne to deliver something that we're calling the Cremorne project, which again is a scale up of the Train 100 data analyst, but working with a bunch of significant employers down in Cremorne, such as Car Sales, MYOB, REA Group, Live Tiles, which is all about putting in place a local place-based approach in terms of what are their needs, how do you help how do you then deliver a pipeline of talent through the TAFE to meet the needs of those employers, all of which have a need. They're competing against each other, and so it's about that sustainable pathway of talent. So we're really excited about that. That was launched a couple of weeks ago. And we're also seeing some really good opportunities around the states in terms of work that we can do around a skills-based approach, which again enables them to deliver training within their states or upskilling against needs. So excited about that. I won't talk in any detail about that, but hopefully an announcement to come out in a couple of weeks. We've also got in the upskilling space something called the Digital Fluency POC, and so that is a online free approach to training whereby we assess people, they get directed to the right course, and then it's going to be really interesting working with the small and medium-sized employers as to whether or not they can encourage their staff to actually start to do things themselves to actually uplift their own digital skills. The third element of what we do is about uplifting capability. And so this is that sort of hardcore link back into the RTOs. So we need to codify what we learn, and we then need to describe that so that it's easier for those RTOs to be able to deliver the ICT training or the digital training that we want. And so we're working closely there with Organisations like Box Hill, again, that the Cremorne project is an important part of that as we trial the system, as we look at what works, how you engage employers, how you engage teachers to sort of really uplift the capability. So from that, we'd see some materials that would come out, hopefully a redesigned, if you like, exemplar training package that is simple to apply, but all about trying to operationalize that skills-based approach. The fourth element of what we do is, again, similar to Jodie, it's about engaging with stakeholders, massive range of stakeholders, quite hard to get your hands around it just because of the numbers. And so we have a series of approaches there to engage employers, to engage with the states, and importantly, to engage with the training providers. So this conversations like this are super important. One of the things that we found is that with employers, there has to be an exchange of value. Some employers get it and are investing in it, but for the smaller size organizations, you've got to sort of like make it real for them. You've got to make it easy for them to engage and to take it seriously. And so one of the approaches that we've adopted to try and address that is to create something called the DSO toolbox. In there, there's a bunch of free online tools that they can use. It will help you to assess the capabilities of your staff, for employers to do an assessment of their own knowledge, a link to things like free online upskill training, and then some sort of badging mechanism. But there's something there to try and encourage people to do something for themselves, to sort of nudge them into the right place. And I think that's a really interesting opportunity for the training providers. You know, they can access those types of training and they can apply that to the many courses that they do. It'll cost them nothing, but it actually recognizes the fact that every person who's going through any type of training, there needs to be a digital component to that. And then, so those are really the four sort of programs that we run. We're really excited about those. Over the next sort of couple of months, they'll drip into the system, and so that will start to give us a much greater presence, and we'll be able to measure the impact of those, and that will help to direct, you know, where we go to and the lessons that we learn. My appeal, I think, across the board as we go into this next phase of work is that we absolutely are about aligning on language, aligning on approach, and collaborating wherever possible. The TAFE sector is hugely important. Your massive knowledge, massive scale, we really want to learn from you. And we really hope that as a result of that collaboration, we can also provide something to you which will help to improve your own products, your own capabilities as we go forwards. But there is no doubt that if we're on our own, we'll achieve nothing. By working together, we can achieve lots. So really looking forwards to building on this platform as we go forwards. Thank you again for giving me this time.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And again, I encourage people, we will have time for questions. We're going to move through all 5 speakers first. So please use the chat if there are specific things on your mind that you want to focus to any of our 5 industry speakers. I'd now like to welcome Gavin Lind. Gavin has already asked a question, which was fabulous. And now we're going to hear about what's happening in the Mining Skills Organisation pilot. Thank you very much, Gavin.
Thanks very much, Jenny. And thank you, Mary, for the invitation to participate in today. I do want to just share my screen this time. Let me do that if I can. So thanks to my colleagues, Patrick and Jodie for their introductory comments here. But I do want to just mention that part of what we do collectively here is to just challenge the system and but certainly to innovate as we go along. So for us at the Mining Skills Organisation pilot, probably a little bit in a uniquely different position in that we have an industry that has consulted with us, that has provided us a lot of insights to develop a forward work program and specific hubs that we could almost pick as the low-hanging fruit in one sense, but also you're realizing low-hanging fruit isn't always ripe. So there are some challenges for us as we progress as well. But certainly for us, part of what is so integrated with what Patrick, Jodie, and many of the speakers today have said is that technology adoption in our industry, provides us with some unique insights and unique opportunities to progress in ways that we haven't done before, particularly because the speed at which things are happening. And we hear it time and time again from industry is that, why does it take so long to get an accredited course up? Why does it take so long to get some new content into things? What is the the holdup? Because by the time these things get through a process, very often the technology's moved on or becomes not obsolete, but it becomes impractical to use. So for us at the Mining Skills Organisation pilot, and you can see from the screen here, I just want to focus on the 4 project hubs. And the way they present it there is almost from the funnest to the most challenging in some ways. But part of what we're looking at is the apprenticeships model. And one that we want to trial is, or busy trialing is an accelerated model to that. And it's around, that notion of, we don't want to, take 4 years to do all apprenticeships. And the question really that industry asks, is there a smarter way in which something can be done to get an apprentice on the tools within 2 years? So part of what we're looking at there, and using a specific pilot or occupation in the heavy duty diesel fitter, is to see if there are proof of assessment points. And I always say those in the wrong order sometimes, but how do we change those assessment points, those proof points? And how do we get industry more involved in those assessment processes, firstly? And how do we become smarter in the delivery of some of the content, which surely we can better harness the digital platforms and make those pathways to the apprenticeship a lot more streamlined, a lot easier for people to get into. The digital transformation, and I do like this one a lot because it is prefaced on using what one of the members in Western Australia have created in the Certificate 2 in Automation and Certificate 4 in Remote Operations, and that's Rio Tinto. And Rio Tinto, who have these courses, those two accredited in the Western Australian area, wanting to put it into the National Library. And it's the digital transformation for us is about how do we get in a speed to market way all of that content, all of those accredited courses developed by industry. How does industry gift it basically to the National Library? And we're finding, this is a very interesting process. Currently in the current system, it could take 12 to 18 months. We have a model where we'd love to see it happen in 90 days. That's got a few eyebrows raised, but we're always confident at the Mining Skills Organization with what we can achieve. And that's part of what we're trialing with our digital transformation. It's a very specific way in which you're taking one set of qualifications and moving them into the National Library. The Qualifications Reform Trial, I know Jodie mentioned the one she's doing, but we're also involved with one. And again, it links to the occupation of the heavy duty diesel fitter in the apprenticeships hub. And that specifically is looking at, how do we think about the occupational standard and the industry definition of what that competent person looks like, in part because the competent person is the person industry wants. They've defined it and they define the job. So it's about understanding all the aspects of what makes that role a competent person, not in the true sense competent person, but to give the competency of that role. And how do we then go to the training providers and get the training providers to develop the training standard that goes with it? Now, it might seem simple, but it's amazingly mismatched, and a lot of consultation has gone into, particularly in that one trial occupation, to get industry. I know my colleague Nigel, who's on the call today, he spent time up in the Pilbara on the tools, or with people on the tools to understand what this looks like. Industry's been very engaged and interested. So if we get it right for this one, I think it'll better line up how we use the TAFE system, particularly, or the broader RTO system, to give us that efficiency and not waste effort in delivering what industry actually needs. The fourth of those hub projects, the attraction and retention, is really 5 separate projects in one. But this goes to the great part of things about how do we fundamentally attract talent into the industry. We're not necessarily a large employer operationally. About 256,000 people work in mining operationally. But when you add the mining equipment and technology services sector to it, that workforce grows to about 1.1 million. So about 1 in 10 Australians is somehow linked to the mining and resources sector. So the attraction and retention bit, takes the form, and Robert, and your presentation earlier particularly was of interest because it takes that form of how do we think about micro credentials to allow people to think about the context in which mining exists, and how do we think about that skills transferability of complementary industries or co-located industries to mining, like agriculture, defense, advanced manufacturing, because there absolutely would be some level of base skill that everyone has, and just the context in which they might operate in our industry is where micro-credentialing package would come into a good use. We are thinking about the alternate pathways in, so I think that's a bit what's important. It's also about understanding what the workforce demand actually is. And all three of us at the skills organizations, we work with the National Skills Commission and the work that they do, but we're all faced with the same problem, is that unless you can adequately define what the actual demand for a particular occupation or role in our respective industries is, and can adequately match that, it's very hard for us to signal to the training sector and the skilling sector that this is what we need and this is how we need to get it. So that's what we've been up to with the Mining Skills Organisation pilot. It's been a very busy phase. With the next 12 months, certainly seeing a lot of what I've just spoken about come to fruition, and very much looking forward to furthering discussion with the TAFE sector. And again, thank you very much to TAFE directors for the opportunity to present with my colleagues. So I'll hand that back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gavin, and thank you for that insight into the mining sector. So they were presentations from our three service organisations. We're now going to go to two of the service skills organisations. We're going to start with manufacturing and hear from Sharon Robertson, who's the CEO of IPSA. Thank you, Sharon. I think you're on mute, Sharon.
That helps. Just unmuted myself. So thank you. I'm going to again attempt to share my screen. I didn't do it in one slide. I've done it in two. And as Jenny mentioned, the first of the SSOs, and certainly it was great to hear the challenges of the system that are being enacted by the SOs. It's really good. For us, for the SSOs, we do need to keep the operations of the system going. So we are going to quickly, or I'm going to quickly cover off a couple of the updates that might be of interest to our TAFEs, but also perhaps just touch on a piece of work that we did that was perhaps a different way of industry engagement for us. As you can see, what's on that slide is actually all the work that we're doing at the moment. And I'll just put that properly. Without going, I'm not going to go through all of those, but I did particularly want to touch on very briefly, and I promise I won't go into too much detail on a couple of them. The first one is the manufacturing and engineering space. We're in the process of putting together a combination of new and revised components to focus on higher level welding processes. And that's to support the needs of welding applications in areas such as shipbuilding, submarine manufacturing, and related heavy engineering applications, including infrastructure and renewable energy. We're also looking at new quals at the diploma level that considers advanced manufacturing processes and systems, in particular in the technical and paraprofessional roles, especially those associated with Industry 4.0. The consultation process, or the draft for that, will be available in the coming weeks. The other one that I thought I'd touch on is the circular economy piece there. That's circular economy and sustainable operations. The manufacturing sector, as I'm sure many of you would know, is moving towards a closed loop system, which includes recycling, reuse, and remanufacturing principles, as well as legislative changes and the ban on the export waste. This particular piece of work links our actual textiles, clothing, and footwear IRC with our sustainability IRC, primarily because of the increasing focus in sustainability and product stewardship in that area. So you can see that we're starting to get, I suppose, a number of areas of manufacturing coming closer together with, I suppose, that overall objective of actually achieving stronger outcomes. I won't focus any more on those. I'll try and keep this brief, but I thought I'd just give you a quick update on where we're at. Just going to another area I wanted to talk to just briefly. I think many of you may be aware that IPSA embarked on a piece of work earlier this year, and that was Skilling Up. It was a webinar series we ran for about 6 months, which culminated in a report that was provided to governments and key stakeholders. That particular work was launched by Minister Cash. We had over 500 employers attend. There were 6 webinars with manufacturing sectors that IPSA supports. And it was also supported by industry leaders from AI Group, BCA, ACCI, and ACTU. And as you can see, that what's up on the slides is just some of the key areas of our findings. And again, I'm not going to go through all of the findings, but it was interesting, particularly this morning, to hear some of the great work that's underway, because that's some of the stuff that we're certainly hearing from employers and from industry. For instance, addressing skill shortages. There was I think it was Ines Willix that actually mentioned we need to put apprenticeships back as being the bedrock of our education and training system. So certainly we see the opportunity to increase opportunities for apprenticeships at a diploma level. That was an area that was very much discussed. The skills system responsiveness, again, listening to Robert and Tracy this morning about the need to develop micro-credentials. That's certainly something that industry has called out for. And that's for the recognition of skills beyond entry level, importantly. They're certainly calling out the need for upskilling and reskilling with a wide range of prior experience and capability, including through flexible, stackable micro-credentials. So that was very much the conversations that we heard. So it was great to see the work that was underway. The other one there, collaboration, I suppose that's quite broad, and it is quite broad because it was actually raised in a number of different forums. And that was the need for better collaboration between education sectors, that's schools, universities and TAFEs. And as Patrick alluded to just earlier, we also need that better collaboration between industry and education providers. That was actually, I suppose, what they were talking about is the support from industry is so important to be part of that solution. And they certainly see that there's a need for, I suppose, more investment, both by way of funding and by way of, I suppose, efforts across the board. So you can certainly see that, I suppose, a lot of key themes, irrespective of the sector that you're working in or for, is starting to come out in the discussions from employers. The last thing that I'll leave you with, and certainly I'm sure we'll have conversation at the end, is actually that I suppose the optimism that actually existed in our manufacturing sector discussions. I think many of them saw this as the opportunity to perhaps reset and actually really look at things differently. So I suppose as much as a situation we find ourselves in challenging, they very much saw it as an opportunity to actually do things a bit differently. So I'll stop there, Jenny.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you for that insight into one, where you're up to, and also that significant piece of work that IPSA led with the manufacturing industry. We'll now turn to Paul Walsh, who's the CEO of Australian Industry Standards, and Paul's going to talk about the digital uplift for workers, another piece of work that has been led by AIS. Thank you, Paul.
Great, thanks very much, Jenny. Now hopefully I'm sharing my screen. Hopefully that's worked. So thanks. So just if I can just start by, like many of my colleagues, begin with an acknowledgement of the Ngunnawal people whose land I'm joining you from today here in Canberra, and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land where you are joining us from today, and to their elders past, present and emerging. So thanks to TDA for the invitation. It's greatly appreciated. Always enjoyable to talk to our colleagues in the TAFEs and maintain that relationship. So Australian Industry Standards, just quickly, as a skill service organisation, much like Sharon's, looking after manufacturing, we have a wide remit that we look after across 11 in IRCs and 12 training packages, looking after transport, logistics, rail, maritime, aviation, electrotechnology, transmission, distribution and rail, generation, gas, water, corrections, and public safety, which includes police, defence, fire and emergency. So quite a wide and diverse range of industries that we look after. The Australian Industry and Skills Committee commissioned a piece of work in 2019 to provide advice on how Australia's VET system can most effectively respond to digital change that is underway across industry and its impact on the nation's workforce. That piece of work was commissioned for AIS to undertake to support the expert panel and to undertake the fairly extensive research and consultation that sat behind the development of that strategy. So we undertook a domestic research piece and an international research piece, which looked at what was happening both here and overseas. That was good practice around the way that you could support the digital change, the digital transformation in a range of economies, as I said, in here in Australia. We also undertook a fairly extensive piece of consultation, and that consultation included TAFE Directors Australia and their representatives. So what we know about this is that this is quite time critical, that we are seeing some really insightful analysis of what is happening around the future of work. And there are predictions that by 2034, automation will have displaced 2.7 million workers, 56% of whom will be male, and that technology will augment 4.5 million workers' jobs. So that'll also provide a 15% capacity uplift to business. What we were finding throughout the piece of work was that a real central issue here is that jobs of tomorrow are going to be technology enabled, but they're also very much around the human element, that human centered, they are going to become more human centered. So what we need is that digital transformation will require the VET system to upskill and reskill the workforce in both dimensions. And we're seeing an ongoing evolution of digital technologies. We see the increasing speed of adoption at scale. Their impact on job roles mean that we must formally and overtly move to an ecosystem of lifelong learning. The core tenet, or the principle by which the expert panel based their work on, or what they always considered as their guiding light, was leave no worker behind. This piece of work focused on existing workforce, and so it's not new, it wasn't focusing on new entrants. And the reason for that is that to face and meet the challenge of digital transformation, the existing workforce is a significant part of that response. That we can't just rely on the new students and the new school leavers coming through to fix the digital transformation issues that we're facing. So we need to take people along that journey. And part of their thinking there was that what we know from our consultations and discussions is that one of the key issues for workers is fear. And how do you address fear? So that was certainly the reason for focusing on or looking at that guiding light of leaving no worker behind. The strategy that we developed on behalf of the expert panel also was looking at the VET workforce, as I said, the existing workforce, but also looking at the interface with schools and then the interface with higher education, because they are quite important. So we can't ignore those interfaces, but also looking at it through the lens of vocational education and training and the occupations that's covered by that. So the final report or strategy document that came out of that is called The Learning Country. And very much there's a reference to the learning country that for those that are aware of that, it's in the front of the strategy. And I'd certainly encourage you to go and have a look at the strategy, which is available at the website there, digitalskillsformation.org.au. It's too big to send around as a document. But it's certainly something we'd commend to have a look at. So out of the strategy, there were 5 key focus areas. And the first of those is system setting. So the recommendations are looking at how we can establish a national lifelong learning policy. We also acknowledge that we need to look at how we increase the investment pool through models of shared investment. The $6.4 billion that goes into the vocational education and training system nationally is not going to be enough to meet the demand on its own. So, and there's been some alone. So we can look at some of the history around vocational education and training where we've had those co-investment models or shared investment. So how do we look at some of the best practices that have driven really good outcomes? There's also recommendations to consider private and public partnerships, and also look for how do we become a key partner in Australia's innovation agenda. So not left behind, but actually forward leaning into how we drive that or inform that innovation agenda. The focus area 2 was industry leadership. And it was absolutely acknowledged that without industry driving and being a part of the conversation, this becomes far more difficult. So we need to also make sure that we support industry in becoming part of that leadership. We're driving that leadership through a national program of independent trusted advisors and also those shared investment models to support enterprise workforce development. And again, many of you who've been around the system would be aware that some of those independent trusted advisor arrangements have existed in the past and been of great benefit. So again, we think that there's some lessons from the past that can be used for the future. Learner support services are absolutely critical here. So making sure we set up individualised learner support. So not just during, but it's before, during and after training. And again, the importance of after training learner support will be absolutely critical in developing a culture of national lifelong learning. Obviously, for great interest for this group would be around teaching and learning. And we absolutely acknowledge the importance of having those who operate within the practitioners within the teaching and learning area, for them to be best enabled to meet the challenge of digital transformation, because it impacts both on you as organisations and people, but also your ability or the capacity to deal with that when you are taking learners on those journeys. So looking at where we could implement consortia-based programs to drive innovation, applied research in the use of digital technologies and ways we can enhance teaching, learning and assessment, strengthening digital skills within TAE, and also bringing on more opportunities for national long-term professional development programs in communities of practice to build practitioners' digital capabilities. And the fifth area of focus was for training products. And the first one there is a digital capability framework. The importance of a digital capability framework is to give us a common language and a common base from which to work. There are a whole range of capability frameworks out there, from foundation skills to core skills for work, and a number of others. And the idea here is that we need to find one single place that we can all speak from. So we are all speaking from that common language and common understanding around that digital capability framework. We've also, the panel has recommended a strategic review of training packages, looking at them through the lens of digital transformation. So where are they addressing it well, and where are the opportunities for improvement? And then finally, looking at how we can further support training practitioners through the evolution of the existing companion volumes. So instead of leaving them as a static piece of support information, actually making them alive, and how they can evolve to identify opportunities and technologies to inform training and assessment strategies within training organisations. So as I said, there is the Digital Transformation Expert Panel Strategy, the Learning Country, is available on the website, digitalskillsformation.org.au. And if you want to find out more about the work that Australian industry standards are doing, our website name is there, so australianindustrystandards.org.au. We have comprehensive project pages on the work that is in train at the moment, and across all of the dimensions I talked about that we look across for industry with the IRCs and the training packages, you'll find a fair bit of work going on, so that can help you in understanding where things are at. Thanks, Jenny. That's it from me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for outlining that piece of work that culminates in that work report, The Learning Country. And Ron, I think, has put up on the chat the link to that if anyone hasn't yet downloaded it. So where we, can I firstly thank all 5 of our industry speakers, to Gavin, to Patrick, to Jody, to Sharon, to Paul. Thank you for your succinct and very pithy presentations about where you're leading in your specific industry sectors. To us all now, we've got half an hour to engage in a discussion and to engage in some questions and also pose perhaps some other thoughts to our industry people and maybe even to each other around some of the things we've heard this afternoon, or if you wish to go back to this morning. So please give some thought to what you might like to ask, and we will start off firstly with Mary. Thank you, Mary. We might, just before we do, Mary, we might get everyone to put, and hopefully this doesn't crash anything, everyone to put their cameras back on so we can see who we all are and who's talking. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. It was actually a clap for all of you as opposed to a hands up for questions. But now that I've got the floor, I will ask a question. I suppose to each of you, and particularly the new SOs, what do you see as the biggest challenge in innovating in this space of not only product development, but collaboration with providers?
So perhaps
Jenny,
if we
it's to
start,
any one of the,
So look, we'll go, how about we go in order of how they presented? Jodie, we'll go to you first.
Thanks, Mary and Jenny. From the human services perspective, I think, and one of the slides that I didn't show is that employers are, and the NCBR data shows us, turning away from training, not just accredited training, but all forms of training in some way, shape or form, as the pressure of the workforce issues that they have comes down on them. You know, you're talking about industries with churn of up to 60%, somewhere between 30 and 60% in their staffing. They're competing for the same staff. They've got huge reform agendas coming down on top of them, and they are barely keeping their heads afloat. They're actively recruiting on an ongoing basis. The skills that they need aren't available. Yesterday, in a forum, an employer said, warm and vertical. And at the same time, there's huge pressure, as we know, from royal commissions and the like, to talk about the quality and the skills that are required there. And those discussions start to push down higher level quals into entry level jobs. And that nexus is creating a discussion where the training sector feels a little bit not the training sector, the human services sector feels overwhelmed, and they're looking for any hope. What I would say is that many of them haven't engaged in sector discussions for a long time. And as we do that, they are receptive to that discussion. But I think it's a long road to hoe, and we're talking about tens of thousands of employers, and that is growing.
Thank you. Patrick.
Thank
Any
you.
thoughts?
No, thank you very much, and a great question. I capture it in two ways. I think first and foremost, it's around alignment. There are, certainly in the digital sector, there are many different initiatives going on, but there isn't much that brings it all together. And you heard Paul talk about the work that he was doing, which obviously, you know, we're really excited about that, and sort of obviously really keen to make sure that we're all sort of properly integrated as that work sort of takes shape. But there are 50 different digital skill projects across federal government. Each state government is doing its own thing in a slightly different way. There's no common language that pulls it together. And if we're serious from a strategic sense in terms of trying to uplift the capability, we have to have a way of bringing the narrative together and to focus attention at the highest priority needs at the right time. And so I think alignment is problem number one. And then the second piece, and Jodie talked to this a little bit just now, you know, when we're engaging with employers, employers need to give a shit. There has to be value, and just to talk conceptually about we need to make the system better isn't good enough. You know, we actually have to produce services that are turnkey, that will stimulate and engage employers at the small, medium and large scale enterprise in a way that's going to help them meet the needs that they have each and every day. And I think that's a really important part of trying to get to where we all want to get to, which is an employer-led process, which is taking people into work.
Thank you, Gavin. Sorry, thank you, Patrick. Over to you, Gavin.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the point is quite clear. It was nicely stated earlier about reskilling, upskilling, and identifying those points of opportunity, because I think it's about industry knowing what it is, but it's finding those partners to come along on the journey with us, to make it so, to embed things, to make the change quickly, to, be nimble, be agile, to recognize that units of competence and skill sets or micro-credentials, those stackable elements, I think, are so crucial to our industry, because it's about entry pathways into and out of, because the skilled workforce exists, but it doesn't necessarily exist in the way that our industry needs it right now or 6 months or a year from now. But we can and must do something to encourage that pathway.
Thank you, Gavin. Sharon next, but I'll just draw you to the chat. The report that Sharon referred to, the manufacturing skills report, Nick Hill has put a link onto that report, which is off the IPSA website, along with the AIS report, which Paul referred to. Different little chat comments, but they are both there. Sharon, over to you to make a comment.
Thanks, Jenny. I'm just going to agree with everything that's been said so far, but I just suppose to put a slightly different angle on it. Obviously, the skills needs and the response needed is now. And you look at some of the things in our space, such as that need for that sovereign capability here in Australia. To make that happen, we need to onshore supply chains that we haven't onshored before. That's new skills. And to have those new skills, we actually do need to do something about that. And that's not going using the current system that we've got to actually drive the development that's needed. And as we all know, it all takes way too long and it's way too inflexible. So certainly I do think one of the biggest challenges is the system not providing the necessary framework to be as responsive as we could or should.
Thank you, Sharon. And Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Jenny. The joy of going last is I can cherry pick out of the other four. No, thank you. For me, there's a fundamental piece to this that is around the currency of training packages and units of competency. So units of competency are a highly valuable product that we have in Australia, and they really are the building blocks we can use for a whole range of purposes. So that importance shouldn't be underestimated. However, as Sharon just mentioned there, the system is fairly cumbersome, and we need to look at as many ways as possible to speed that up. And I know that is being looked at, but having been around this particular area for around 10 years, we've been looking at it for 10 years, and we do need to find ways to increase speed to market and agility, because it is very much around what I think Gavin said earlier around, the time it takes you from inception to delivery. It's kind of almost redundant. So we need to address that critically, but we do also need to respect, I think, the importance of national currency through units of competency. How we package them up and use them really comes down to the way that the system's designed. It is designed to be flexible. It doesn't always have to be through a qualification. It can be used for a whole range of other ways for workforce development needs. And again, I do think it's how do we get a better understanding of what else is happening through government. Picking up Patrick's point, we found that with the digital transformation strategy work, that there was a lot of other things going on, and trying to harness them all. Every time we had a conversation with somebody, we found out we got pointed to somebody else who was doing something. So we were certainly well engaged with the DSO, with the ICT IRC, with industry players, with PM&C on the work that they were doing. But again, then we found about, we engaged with the Digital Inclusion Alliance, to make sure that we were picking up the work that they were doing. We were all trying to share and understand what each other was doing, but it does become quite challenging because there is a lot happening, particularly in the digital space, as we try to transform the economy. So it's a massive challenge, but if we can handle that and we can harness that, I think we're in a better position. So that will drive innovation.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you for taking on Mary's very big question. I'm going to turn now to Bill, who's got his hand up. Over to you, Bill, a question.
Yeah, this is a question more for Gavin than anyone else. Gavin, I'm just keen to hear, given our focus on, as an organisation, on renewable energy sector, circular economy, and obviously the transition to zero emissions economy ultimately across Australia, the work that you're doing in the heavy diesel area, does that at all take a focus in thinking about what fuel cell electric vehicles and electric vehicles will play in that particular arena, particularly for mining, given that mining is already starting to move away from diesel?
Great question. Thanks for that, Bill. The short answer is we're piloting our change with the heavy-duty diesel fitter. I think it's a natural extension, and the way you describe it is the technologies of the future in the industry is going to be about how we get the workforce to participate in achieving the climate credentials or the climate targets, Paris or otherwise, whatever you want to define or whatever the definitions are. So I think a natural question, Bill, and I think something certainly we'll be looking at, coming back to say new technologies aren't just automation, aren't just robotics, AI, but they are about how do we enable the workforce to participate in those future, in just the way you've described. So I hope we can keep the conversation going to work this out together.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat from Leonie Morgan.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, Jenny. My question is there in the chat for everyone, but just to explain it, George was talking with us this morning about about the context in which we find ourselves, the current context and what it means for politics in the future. Mary asked all the panelists about what were the challenges. And my question to anyone on the panel or everyone on the panel is, what are the opportunities within the current context for us going forward?
We might go, is there anyone in the panel who'd specifically like to start that off? Patrick, over to you.
I'm happy to give it a go. I'm so impressed by how much energy there is out there in terms of, a real desire, in the world that I live in, from the digital side, there's a real desire to make a difference and to move forwards. So there's lots of investment, there's lots of energy, there's a real sort of energy around the space. That's not just in terms of, what's going on in government, but also in terms of what's happening in the private sector. So industries and organizations really are trying to get aboard this stuff and trying to move forwards. I think the challenge for us is around that, is that of how do you harness that energy? How do you harness it in a positive way that enables the whole system to move forwards together? So if you think about it in terms of what's happening in the higher ed space and some of the great initiatives there from the digital side, how do you pick that up and how do you link that back into the registered training space? How do you formalize potential opportunities between higher ed and TAFEs and RTOs so that actually it's not seen as a sort of an alternate sort of set of pathways or systems, but actually they're mutually complementary. I think there's a real opportunity there if we can sort of collaborate in a more effective way. So actually I see immense energy and excitement. I think the challenge is how do you sort of bring it together and enable the systems to work together.
Jenny, if I can add to Patrick's answer, I think if we take it back from the vet system perspective, the opportunity here is for us to kind of recover from the vet fiat debacle, to be honest. And to talk about, as Paul said, we've been talking about the agility of training package development for 10 years. And the question is, what's the answer? Right? And the opportunity given to us through skills organisations and hopefully through whatever we call the next iteration, I can't say the words, will lead us to a discussion that brings back the value of the education delivery process to you guys as RTOs and moreover as TAFE institutes to deliver value to industry that doesn't have to be as prescriptive but still takes advantage of the stackable nature of units of competency and the strength of that Paul outlined, and takes us forward in the discussion to kind of capture the great work that was shown this morning around how you can respond to a range of the issues. Tracy's presentation around micro-credentials from TAFE Queensland, taking in skills, knowledge, attributes, the things that are becoming really important to the people that you want in the industries that we're serving, and make that a real conversation and one where the training system gets alongside industry. We say we're looking for industry-led. I think we're looking for industry and education collaboration that actually feeds each other and pushes forward what the opportunities are for skilling staff and continuing to skill staff and to building our economy.
Thank you, Jody. Anyone else who'd like to have a go at Leonie's question? Sharon.
Thanks, Jenny. Just to agree and perhaps go back to what Patrick was saying, we need to be mindful of the fact this week's Skills Week. And one of the things that certainly has struck me this year from other years is it feels different. And it feels different because I think VET's got the floor. I think vocational education training is going to be one of the key things to actually bring us out of the current, I suppose, situation we're in. I won't use the big R word or anything like that. Industries and governments and alike understand that really they'll be turning to us to actually go, well, how do we get through this? So I think the skills system and the VET sector in particular is very well positioned to actually once and for all finally actually claim its space as the key enabler for our employers in enabling that shift and change that's going to need to occur and is occurring. And I think leave you with, I think it was again one of our speakers from our sessions, you don't have industry if you don't have skills. So I think we're all realizing now that, and that collaboration is the only way we're going to make that happen. And I'm feeling a different sense of collaboration. I think you agree, Patrick, that it's not just obviously between industry and various providers. It's actually across the whole entire spectrum that we do need to work together. And we're seeing it shift in people's, I suppose, perception in the last while. So just that.
Thank you, Sharon. Okay,
Jenny, I might just jump in there if I could.
Yep.
Sorry, it's Paul. Just in response to that, I did say it came out of the digital transformation strategy document that VET will play a key role in upskilling and reskilling. So that reiterates what Sharon just said. I think the really exciting thing for me that is an opportunity is, and I go back to the strategy which talked about fear and leaving that worker behind, is that the opportunity for me is looking at what jobs are going to start to look like, how are they changing, and finding examples. So if I look, we're talking to the transport logistics industry now about what do jobs of the future look like. So we've got a massive issue around truck drivers. We can't get enough. Everyone says, don't worry about it because automated trucks are going to take over. Well, they're not going to take over that quickly to respond to that demand. We're not going to be able to change our fleet that quickly. We haven't got the infrastructure to have vehicles running up and down the road, but it will incrementally change. But also, what are the skills you will need as that changes? So the workforce dynamic changes. We'll have drivers getting out of the right seat, getting into the left seat. They'll become more of a pilot or a first responder. They'll be doing other things that's not just around the driving task. So how do we transform that and understand what the skills needs are? If we can identify that, we take the workforce with us. We also respond to that issue of fear, that this is not to be feared, it's to be embraced. And then we're positioning the economy, because I think that's the big thing for me, is that it's an economic driver. This is an absolute economic driver for Australia. If we get this right, if we can get the skills we need and develop our workforce, we stay globally competitive and become more globally competitive, and particularly in the region that we operate, so which is going to be really, really important. So,
thank you, Paul. Okay, I think we'll now move on to a new question. Robert, I think you've got your hand up. You're on mute, Robert.
There we go. The button works, the spacebar didn't. Just probably to finish off on that last one, Jenny, was in terms, I think there is significant opportunity, and agree obviously with all of the panelists, but going to some of the things that Paul was saying, that we do actually have some really good fundamental building blocks in terms of units of competency and the things that are packaged together. One of the biggest challenges that we have, though, is speed to market and getting those things together. And I guess over the last few years, in the work that we've done in a small section of TAFE Queensland, in our commercial business unit, it's about how we actually better engage with businesses and industry and understand exactly what they want, and then actually work across, in our case, the 500 or so programs and all the materials and resources we have to package it up in a way that responds to what they want. And there is significant opportunity, I think, to do that better. But one of the challenges we have in that space is obviously the policy and funding settings. If we're meant to be responding to what businesses and industry actually need and want in the future, everything is based around student choice, student demand, etc. And it's one of the discussions that we've had sort of at length with the Mining Skills organisation about, well, if we're not looking at actually changing the way that the policy and funding settings sit in terms of, you know, prioritizing what businesses and industry want, then we're still going to have this challenge of, you know, needing to develop programs that generate revenue from student-driven demand, when in fact we're actually trying to meet industry-driven demand. But sort of to go back to what Paul was saying and the other panelists, I think there is significant opportunity by using what we have already to respond to what that demand is, but it's about how we go about engaging with businesses and industry to define that.
Thank you, Rob. Are there other questions or indeed comments that anyone would like to make? Okay, well, oh, Mary, over to you.
Thanks, Jenny. I just want to take up that the comment that Jody made about the flexibility and agility, and that we have been talking about this for a number of years. So what is it that's different now? And I know you said, Jody, that you don't know what the answer is, but is there anything different now that means that those issues will be addressed this time round?
I would say, Mary, appetite, right? So the Australian government's got appetite, and they've shown appetite through, you know, the strengthening report, or the Joyce report as we call it, and you know, that's got some age on it now, but that appetite seems to still be there. And we haven't seen endorsed qualification design trials before, in my experience, that are really starting to say, well, how do we think about it differently? How do we actually overcome those issues? And what needs to change across the whole sphere of influence, certainly from a Commonwealth perspective. And that conversation is being engaged with the states. Now, of course, that's going to be an interesting and probably a protracted discussion. But it hasn't been presented yet, but the reform agenda starts with a review of the standards, the establishment of the National Skills Commission, the establishment of the National Careers Institute, then the SSOs and the industry enterprise model, taking that further. On top of that is qualification design trials and qualification reform trials. And if all those things come together, then the opportunity exists to address that. If you then look forward to how that works, that's how will qualifications be approved on the table for discussion. And if we have an industry-led frame, then what does that look like is one of the things that will be interesting to see what the outcome is. And what it will give, I think, providers is the ability to actually tailor responsiveness to industry that might get them back to the table and start to talk about real partnership and how you address the issues that are going to be about innovation and future and competitive solutions that come between working with skilling organisations and industry and contribute to competitiveness of the country or the social policy of the country or what's important to us. No one's coming in behind, but that's okay.
Response, Mary or Gavin?
Look, my response is I hope so. I was looking for a fingers crossed and in our little emojis there. I hope so. And given I think the minister's address at the ACCI thing this week at the launch of Skills Week, of course, with his questioning why does he have to sign off whatever it was and the premierships and really valid questions which obviously lead to the time taken to do anything. So yes, fingers crossed all around, but happy to if someone else wants to add to your answer.
Yeah, I might just add, Mary, I think Jody hit it on the head about appetite. I think there's a lot of people that want the change, and the change, it's born out of frustration, it's born out of opportunity. And George, in his opening remarks this morning, spoke about the effects of having internal borders closed. So when that opportunity opens up again, people are going to want to move and go seek the opportunities. And if the skilling matches the opportunity and matches the exact timing of this, we must be responsive to. This must be an industry, led industry at the forefront, the learner at the center, and the rest that comes together to combine those two to effectively lead to the job that the person wants or upskill the person to the new opportunity if they're already in that job.
Any other comments from anyone on this quite significant point?
Jenny, I would just add, from a training provider perspective, and I know this will be on your agenda as well from an SO perspective, but the impact of, significant changes obviously on the training sector, and we're all dealing currently with, I think there's 57 qualifications out there, all training packages that all are transitioning to new new set of performance criteria, et cetera, So that impact, and I suppose a plea in part of the work that you do and part of this flexibility and agility is how we manage that into the future as well.
Comments from anyone else who would like to add into that conversation? Okay, well, I think that sort of brings us to some closing comments for today's session. And I'm going to do a bit of a summary of what we've heard, because I think we've had some really, really rich presentations that have been very stimulating. This is National Skills Week, and this is at the end of National Skills Week. So it is timely that we had a conversation like this. And as most of you know, this was timed to coincide with World Skills, which we still have many of our young competitors out there doing their thing at World Skills, be it not necessarily in a huge national competition, which is a bit sad this year, but in localized contexts. And we wish them well, and we think about them as we watch other young people, say in the Paralympics, which are on at this time as well, achieve so much through the skills that they develop that collectively we all engage with and we all enable. We started today with George Megloginis, who gave us really stimulating presentation. I think most people will agree with that, because there's been many references back to us. He took us through demographics. He took us through some history of politics too, which was interesting in terms of response. And he then took us into the economic factors and also the emerging impact of lack of skilled migration and what that might mean across our country. We then went on and had 4 different TAFE presentations, all with a very different story, but all that underpinned some key principles, I think. From Stefan, we heard about co-design, we heard about the new institutes of applied technology, and we heard about the partnerships between industry and higher education. That was actually different, but similar to our TAFE Queensland presentation from Tracy and Robert and Peter, who was also there, that talked about the partnerships and how that was actually playing out in practice. But Tracy also took us into that broader conversation about micro-credentials, which I think we actually have this micro-credential thing already worked through in the vet sector, but we're just not naming it enough. We're letting it become a term that I think to some extent is bigger than it probably is, because we actually do it. And I think that Tracy showed us how they were doing it and where they were playing. And then we had 2 regional presentations. Darshi gave us a real insight into what was happening in Southwest, Western Australia, and in that organic and relationship models that are so important in the regions. And from windy Southwest Victoria, Bill told us about the importance of new training in the new energies, in the new wind energy area, and what that might mean, and the industry partnership that TAFE has formed to enable that industry to do what it needs to do. I think that those presentations really showed the importance broadly about how we play with industry. And then we went on to our 5 industry speakers. Jody gave an outline of what was happening through HSSO and concluded with connect, co-create and collaborate. And in many ways, they became the theme of the day, because I think a lot of what we were doing right through today was around those 3 words: connect, co-create or co-design, and collaborate. Patrick talked through a set of principles that the digital group are following around setting the foundations, digital upskilling, uplifting capability, engaging, aligning and collaborating. Again, the word collaborate was very strong, and an appeal from Patrick to align the approach and the language. Gavin gave us some very practical insights of some of the stuff happening in mining, with a challenge around the importance of technical adoption and what that means and where we need to go, and some great examples. Gavin also talked about apprenticeships, and he talked about we need to get industry involved in proofs of assessment points, and it made me reflect back to my time many years ago on fast-tracked apprenticeships, which some of you who've been around the sector as long as I have will know that they were a thing in the early 2000s. And what we saw come through at that time was some resistance at an industrial relations level. Let's hope that gets broader now in some of this agility and change that we're talking through. And then we went on to hear from both Sharon and Paul, who had information to share around what was happening through the SSOs, and from both of them about 2 significant pieces of work they've done out of their industry-led areas. From Sharon, we heard about the manufacturing skills piece of work that IPSA has led, and the importance, again, Sharon used the word of collaboration between education sectors that came in, as well as education industry and education providers. And Sharon concluded, and I wrote this down, with a really optimistic view of where the sector, or of what is the skills agenda. Paul then took us through the digital transformation skills strategy and what that was all about, and the piece of work that has been released about the learning country. Within that, the recommendations that come from that around system setting, industry leadership, learner support and services, so critical if our learners are to succeed, teaching and learning, and also training products and what that means. I think there was a plea from all 5 of our industry presenters to come with us in terms of collaborating. And I think we heard from our TAFE presentations earlier today that a lot of that is happening at the local level. It is happening. But there's a bigger, broader conversation, which I think certainly Mary's question and then some of the latter conversation, it's also about the system. We can do it at local levels, but it's the bigger question. And to some extent, Jody tried to address that in saying, we've got this bigger system stuff that we've got an aptitude from government now to be responsive, to make some of those changes and to be more agile. So I think we've had a fabulous conversation. I'd like to ask everybody who's here today to go to your reactions mojo and give all of our presenters, whether they came from TAFE or whether they came from industry, a big clap, if I can work out how to do that. I'm sure everybody else will, or a thumbs up, one or the other, something that shows our appreciation to our speakers. To you all, thank you very much for your participation today. I think we've engaged really strongly in trying to find some practical ways in which training is working in collaboration with industry for the benefit of industry outcomes and student progress. And I think we've also challenged ourselves to think about, well, what does it mean at the system level? And this sector is ready to be responsive. TAFEs are ready to be responsive at the system level, to work with our industry leaders that we had here with us today to find those solutions. So we're just before 3 o'clock. It's Friday afternoon. I thank everybody for their involvement, whether you're a speaker or whether you're a participant. It was lovely to see so many faces from around Australia. Heaps of you. It was lovely to see again. And thank you all for taking the time today to come in and be part of this TAFE Talks presentation. Again, I acknowledge the Secretariat for the work they did in pulling this together. And thank you all for your participation, and really have a fabulous weekend, everyone. Bye for now.
And thanks to Jenny as well for a great facilitation, Jenny. So
Well done, Jenny.
Yeah,
My pleasure. Lovely to see you all.